Welcome to HFY Beyond Terra, where humanity doesn't just survive, it becomes the galaxy's biggest surprise. Subscribe, and let's go beyond Terra.
The throne room of the sovereign nest wasn't built for whispers. It was built for echoes, stone ribs arcing like the inside of a leviathan, luminous veins of living crystal running through the walls, and banners woven from the shed auroras of conquered moons. Every footstep rang like a verdict. Every breath sounded borrowed. Jonah Keene stood alone at the room's center, hands open at his sides, as if showing the universe he carried no weapon, only a heart that refused to learn fear properly. Above him, the alien queen rose. She was called Veshtal-Ur, matriarch of the Nakar broods, mother of 1,000 hatchings, the one who had swallowed a star and learned its language. Her crown was not metal but bone, an elegant lattice of her own molted horns. Her eyes were opals filled with storms. When she spoke, the translation insects implanted behind Jonah's ear spasmed and sang. "Why does my daughter call you father, human?" the queen roared. The words didn't just hit the air, they hit gravity. The servants flinched in the shadowed alcoves. Guards shifted, chitin plates clicking like knives being tested. Somewhere high in the rafters, a choir of bioluminescent moths dimmed in collective dread. Jonah swallowed. His mouth tasted like copper and old prayers. "I didn't teach her to," he said carefully. "She chose the word." The queen's throat sacs expanded, then compressed, the motion like a bellows priming a furnace. "My daughter," she repeated, slower now, like pressing a claw into a bruise. "Ajari of the pearl line, the one hatched beneath my own blood salt, the one whose carapace I polished with my hands when she first cracked her shell." A stir in the hall. That name carried weight, every syllable a bead on a chain of empire. Jonah looked past the queen's towering form and saw her, a smaller figure half hidden behind the throne's curling spines, peering around them with a child's reckless curiosity. Ajari's eyes were not opals. They were dark and soft and unsettlingly human-shaped. Someone had tried to hide that by carving her pupils into narrow slits with gene-coded light, but the disguise didn't fool Jonah. She held something in her hands, a toy. It was an old maintenance drone Jonah had gutted months ago and rebuilt for her, its casing painted with crude constellations. It wheeled forward on squeaking treads and raised a little arm that made a terrible buzzing sound whenever it sang. Ajari loved it. She loved him, too, in the uncomplicated way children love, completely and without permission. Jonah forced himself to meet the queen's eyes. "I'm not here to steal anything." "Steal?" Veshtal-Ur leaned forward and the room's temperature dropped as if her attention siphoned heat. "You were brought here in irons. You were a gift of conquest, a translator, a tool." "I was," Jonah said, "and then I met your daughter." The queen's mandibles flexed. In her species, that was laughter's cousin, amusement without joy. "Do you think proximity grants you claim?" she asked. "Do you believe because you survived my corridors, because you made my child smile, you may wear a title reserved for blood?" Jonah's heart hammered. He knew what the queen could do. He'd watched her dissolve a rebel diplomat into drifting ash, atom by atom, without rising from her throne. And still he found himself saying, "Sometimes blood isn't the thing that makes a parent." A sharp hiss tore through the hall, 1,000 offended breaths. One guard's claw scraped its spear against the floor. Jonah felt the moment tipping like a cup filling too high. From behind the throne, a small voice pierced the tension. "Mother," Ajari said, stepping out. The queen didn't turn, but her posture shifted. The room adjusted around that word as if mother was a command and not a name. Ajari walked down the steps. Her gait was uneven, still learning her limbs. She wore a simple mantle of woven kelp silk, the color of deep-sea mornings. Around her neck hung a necklace made of tiny metal rings, human rings scavenged from Jonah's broken shackles. She stopped beside Jonah. She was only shoulder-high to him, her fingers 3 long digits, each tipped with a soft pad rather than a claw reached for his hand. Jonah didn't move until she touched him, because even kindness could be interpreted as treason in this place. Ajari looked up at the queen. "He is my father." The translation insects buzzed again as if panicking. The queen's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Ajari's forehead plates shifted. A tell Jonah had learned meant she was choosing words carefully. "He tells me stories," she said. "He fixes broken things. He does not scream when I do wrong. He teaches me the names of stars that do not belong to us." The queen's voice lowered. The room leaned in. "And I do none of these?" "You do," Ajari said quickly, and Jonah felt her grip tight. "But you do them like war." A murmur. Ajari's honesty moved through the hall like a thrown pebble, small but creating rings that touched every shore. The queen rose fully to her height, and Jonah had a sudden, vivid sense of standing before a cathedral that wanted to fall. "You are young," Vestal said. "You are unformed, you are impressionable. This human is soft," Ajari supplied. The queen's mandibles twitched. "Weak." Ajari tilted her head. "Is soft the same as weak?" That question landed harder than any insult. Even Jonah felt it in his bones. The queen descended 1 step. Her shadow swallowed Jonah and Ajari together. "This human is not of our kind," she said, and now her voice was not thunder but the slow grind of tectonic plates. "He does not carry our ancestral memory. He does not feel the call of the brood hymn. He does not know what it is to be bound to a lineage older than your planet's oceans." Jonah spoke because silence would be surrender. "I don't have your memories, that's true. But I have mine, and mine say that a child doesn't pick a parent because of lineage. A child picks a parent because of safety." The queen's gaze snapped to him. "Safety," she repeated. "You suggest my daughter is unsafe with me." Jonah's mouth went dry. He was standing on the edge of a cliff made of etiquette and power. Then he saw it, the tiniest tremor in the queen's hands, not rage, something else. He remembered, suddenly, the night he first met Ajari. How he'd been cleaning conduit blood from a hallway after a skirmish, and he'd heard a quiet sob from an air vent. He'd expected a wounded servant. Instead, a small face had appeared in the grating, eyes too big, curiosity too sharp. Ajari had crawled out, clumsy, covered in dust, wearing a crown of stolen wires. "You're the talking captive," she'd said in broken trade tongue. "I am," Jonah had answered, and his voice had cracked on the word because he hadn't been called anything other than asset in months. She'd squinted at him. "Do you hurt?" Jonah had laughed, because what else could you do when a child asked you that in a warship? "I do," he'd admitted. Ajari had rummaged in her mantle and produced a strip of glowing fabric. She depressed it to his scraped knuckles. "Now you hurt less," she'd announced, as if stating a law. Jonah had stared at her, stunned, and she'd added almost shyly, "Mother says hurting is how we learn to be strong." Jonah had said, "Maybe, but sometimes hurting is just hurting." Ajari had looked at him like he'd handed her a new color. From then on, she came whenever she could. He taught her human lullabies. She taught him the names of ship corridors in her language, which sounded like water flowing over knives. When he was ordered to translate conquests, she sat behind him and tugged on his sleeve whenever he said something cruel, as if reminding him not to become what the queen had purchased. At first, Jonah had thought it was a game. Then one day she'd called him father. And Jonah had understood the danger of being needed. Now in the throne room, that danger became a blade held to his throat. The queen stepped down again, closer. "Human," she said softly, and the softness was somehow more terrifying than the roar. "Tell me what you have done to my daughter." Jonah shook his head. "Nothing. I didn't shape her. I didn't implant the word in her mouth. She asked what it meant, and I told her. That's all." Ajari nodded firmly. "He said father is the one who stays." The queen froze. For a heartbeat, Jonah thought he'd misheard. The translation insects fluttered desperately. Ajari's phrasing didn't map cleanly onto the queen's language, and yet the one who stays. Jonah felt an ache in his ribs because he knew what it meant to stay with someone who might destroy you. The queen's claws curled. "Stays," she echoed, and it was almost a question. Ajari looked up at her mother. "Do you stay, mother? Or do you go to war and leave me with caretakers who sing hymns that make my stomach turn?" A sharp inhale ran through the hall. That was not a question a child asked a queen. But Ajari didn't look afraid. She looked earnest. The way children look when they think honesty is a magic spell that fixes adults. The queen's eyes drifted just for a moment to the alcoves where servants watched with carefully blank faces, then to the guards, then back to Jonah. "You presume to critique my devotion," she said, voice edged. "You presume to define staying." Jonah found his courage in the simplest truth. "I stayed because I had no choice," he said, "and then I stayed because I wanted to." The queen's mandibles opened slightly as if tasting the air. "You wanted to," she repeated, and her voice made it sound like a foreign substance. Jonah nodded once. "Yes." Silence. It pooled, heavy and dark, between them. Then Vestal turned her head and called without raising her voice, "Bring the mirror." The hall reacted as if she'd ordered a death. Two attendants hurried from behind the throne and returned dragging something covered in a black shroud. It was tall, taller than Jonah, mounted on a wheeled platform that left faint frost on the floor. When they reached the center, they yanked the shroud away. Jonah's breath caught. The mirror wasn't glass. It was a slice of something that looked like liquid night held upright, framed in bone. Its surface rippled as if it had a heartbeat. Jonah had heard rumors. Every conqueror had its sacred technology, its fear tool. This was Vestal-Ur's most intimate weapon. "The mirror of lineage," the queen said, watching Jonah closely. "It speaks the truth of blood. It reveals the hidden threads." Ajari took a step back, suddenly uneasy. Jonah felt her fingers slip from his. The queen's gaze sharpened. "If my daughter calls you father, then let us see what claim you truly have." Jonah's stomach dropped. "No," he said. "You don't need to." "I do," Vestal-Ur snapped, and the room trembled with her authority. Then she softened just a fraction, for her sake. Ajari's voice was small. "Mother, I don't want." "You will stand," the queen commanded gently, and the gentleness made it worse. Ajari's legs stiffened as if the words had teeth. Jonah realized the truth with a cold shock. The queen's language wasn't just communication, it was control, a neural bond. A queen's voice could write itself into her child's muscles. Jonah's hands clenched. Anger flared bright and brief. The queen motioned. "Human, approach." Jonah hesitated only long enough to meet Ajari's eyes. She looked scared now, and for the first time he saw that she didn't just call him father because he was kind. She called him father because he did not command her body. Jonah stepped forward. The mirror's surface stirred like a pond noticing a thrown stone. He saw his reflection ripple, fragment, then something else. Images unfolded in the darkness like ink blooming in water. Jonah saw a lab, sterile, bright human hands moving with surgical precision. He saw a small embryo suspended in a gel sphere, genetic code scrolling beside it in shimmering alien glyphs. He saw a signature on a hollow screen, Vestal Then he saw another signature, human, a name Jonah recognized with a jolt of horror, Dr. Mara Keene, his mother. Jonah staggered as if struck. The room gasped. Even the guards made a sound. The queen's eyes widened, an expression Jonah had never seen on her, not surprise, not exactly, recognition. "What is this?" Jonah whispered, voice ragged. The mirror answered in silence, showing more. He saw his mother older than he remembered, standing in a bunker as alarms screamed. He saw her speaking to a shadowy alien figure, her face streaked with tears. "I can't stop them," his mother was saying, though Jonah couldn't hear sound. "They'll wipe you out. They'll wipe us out. The only way is if—" The alien figure extended a claw. A bargain. Jonah's chest constricted. He remembered his mother disappearing when he was 19, the official story a lab accident. He remembered the way the authorities had slammed doors, the way his questions had been swallowed. The mirror showed his mother again, hands pressed to a glass incubator where Ajari's embryonic form floated. "I'm sorry," she mouthed. "I'm trying to make you a bridge." Jonah's vision blurred. Behind him, Ajari made a soft sound, half sob, half awe. "Bridge," she whispered like tasting it. The queen spoke with a strange tightness. "That human is her genetic contributor." Jonah turned sharply. "You knew my mother." The queen's gaze stayed on the mirror. "I knew her as an enemy, then as a negotiator, then as a traitor to her own species." Jonah's blood went ice. "She made a deal with you." "She did," Vestal said. "Save something, perhaps to save you, perhaps to save herself. Humans are complicated in their loyalties." Jonah shook his head, struggling to breathe. "You used her." The queen finally looked at him. "And she used me." In that moment, Jonah saw what he hadn't allowed himself to see before. Vestal wasn't just a monster draped in empire. She was a ruler who had been cornered by annihilation. She had done what rulers did. She had built weapons, alliances, heirs. Ajari was not just a child. She was diplomacy grown in a womb, a hybrid lineage stitched together with betrayal and necessity. A bridge. Jonah's knees threatened to buckle. He gripped the mirror's bone frame to steady himself, and his fingers came away damp with cold. Ajari stepped forward, trembling. "So," she said, voice shaking, "he is—" The queen's voice was low now. "By blood he is not your sire. The genetic contributor was Mara Keene. The other," she hesitated as if the word tasted bitter, "was mine." Jonah's mind reeled. "Yours," Vestal didn't deny it. Her chin lifted. "Ajari was crafted from a joining. A human mind might call it insurance, a future that could speak to both sides." Jonah stared, dizzy with the implications. Ajari looked between them, eyes wide. "Then you are both my—" The queen's throat sacs fluttered. "I am your mother," she said firmly, as if driving a stake into the ground. "By blood, by bond, by law." Ajari's gaze slid to Jonah. Jonah's throat ached. He forced words out. "I'm not related to you," he said softly. "Not the way she is." Ajari's face fell like a dimming star. "But," Jonah added, voice breaking, "I am the one who stayed." Ajari's eyes filled. She reached for him again, and this time Jonah met her halfway, taking her small hand in both of his. The queen watched them. Something changed in her expression, not softer exactly, but exposed, like a blade turned sideways, less useful for cutting. "You have bound yourself to her," the queen said, "without understanding the cost." Jonah looked up. "I understand enough." "Do you?" Vestal-Ur's voice rose, not roaring, but vibrating with contained fury. My daughter is not a pet. She is not a whim. She will inherit my throne or die trying. She will be hunted by rivals. She will be tempted by those who would turn her into a symbol. A bridge can be walked upon from both sides. Jonah swallowed hard. Then she'll need someone who doesn't see her as a tool. The queen's eyes flashed. And you imagine yourself that someone? Jonah didn't answer immediately because the truth was complicated. He had been a prisoner, a translator, a purchased mouth. His kindness had started as survival. If the queen's daughter liked him, maybe he'd live. Then it had become something else, something he hadn't earned the right to name. I don't know what I am to her, Jonah admitted, but I know what I want to be. Ajari squeezed his hand. Father, she whispered stubbornly, as if insisting on the universe's shape. The queen's gaze fixed on Ajari, and the air in the throne room tightened again, as if everyone braced for the command that would snap this bond like a brittle twig. Instead, Vestal-Ur did something unexpected. She stepped down the last stair and came to stand before them. Up close, she smelled like salt and storm and something faintly floral, the scent of deep ocean blooms. Her eyes looked less like opals and more like tired planets. She lowered herself, an act of intentional humiliation for a queen, until she was only a little taller than Jonah. Then, with a slowness that felt like an apology dragged across broken glass, she extended a clawed hand toward Jonah. Jonah didn't move. Ajari looked between them, breath held. The queen spoke, and her voice didn't command, it offered. In my language, she said, there is a word, Kathir. The translation insects buzzed, struggling, then delivered. One who guards the hatching, who is not of the brood, yet is bound by vow, a godparent, a protector, a chosen kin. Jonah blinked, stunned. Vestal-Ur's eyes flicked briefly to Ajari, then back. If you wish to remain, she said, you will not wear a stolen title. You will wear a title I grant, not because you deserve it, but because she has spoken it into being. Jonah's hands trembled. You'd allow it. The queen's jaw tightened. Do not mistake allowance for surrender. Ajari's eyes lit. Kathir, she repeated reverently like a spell. Jonah looked at the queen's extended claw. If he took it, he would be binding himself to a throne that ate worlds. If he refused, Ajari would be left alone with war-shaped love. He thought of his mother, her hands against the incubator, mouthing bridge like a prayer. He thought of a child crawling from an air vent asking if he hurt. He thought of the simplest definition of fatherhood he'd ever learned, the one who stays. Jonah reached out and placed his hand carefully into the queen's. Her claw did not close like a trap. It closed like a contract. The throne room exhaled. The queen rose, pulling Jonah with her, and addressed the hall with a voice that rolled like a new law. Let it be known, she said, that Jonah Keen is bound as Kathir to Ajari of the Pearl line. Let those who would harm her understand. They will face not only my wrath, but his. Murmurs rippled, confusion, awe, anger, calculation. Politics rewrote itself in real time. Ajari beamed, then without thinking, hugged Jonah's waist, pressing her head against his side. Jonah's eyes stung. He tried to blink it away. The queen watched, her expression unreadable. Then, so quietly only Jonah and Ajari heard, she said, Do not leave her. Jonah looked up sharply. The queen's gaze didn't waver. In it, Jonah saw something he'd never expected to find there. Fear, not of enemies, of absence. Jonah nodded once. I won't. Ajari pulled back and looked up at the queen. Mother, she said, he is still my father. The queen's mandibles flexed, amusement again, but this time with a thread of reluctant warmth. In your mouth, she said, words become weapons, Ajari grinned. Or bridges. The queen's eyes softened just a fraction, like an eclipse passing. Jonah held Ajari's hand as the court began to move again, the empire adjusting to a new truth. He wasn't her father by blood. He wasn't her father by law. He was her father because she had named him so, and because he had chosen to stay in a world that would never be safe, simply to make it safer for one child. And somewhere in the mirror's liquid night, Jonah thought he saw his mother's face again, tired, grieving, hopeful, watching the bridge she'd built finally take its first step.